My name is Bruce Hughes, and I'm a program specialist at Federal Student Aid in Policy Liaison and Implementation. And I'm here with my colleagues who I'll let introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Maria Dennis. I'm with Application Processing Division at FSA.
And my name is Aaron Washington. I work in the Office of Post-Secondary Education, Policy, Planning, and Innovation.
Today, we will review the citizenship requirement as it's defined in the Higher Education Act. We'll describe how the student's FAFSA information is matched with that of other agencies to determine the student's citizenship status. We'll follow that up with a discussion on the immigration documents that you may have to collect to make sure that the student meets their citizenship requirement. And we'll close with a discussion on the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, or SAFE system, and the third step verification process. First, in order to receive federal student assistance, a student must be either a U.S. citizen or national, a U.S. permanent resident or other eligible non-citizen, or a citizen of the freely associated states. For U.S. citizens, that means this is someone who's born in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and in most cases, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. For U.S. nationals, this means this is a citizen who was born on American Samoa, Swains Island, or the U.S. minor outlying islands. And finally, for citizens of the freely associated states, these students are from the Federated States of Micronesia, republics of Palau, and the Marshall Islands. These students specifically are eligible for only limited FSA funds, primarily Pell Grant. We've included a screenshot from the paper FAFSA to highlight the questions that are specific to citizenship on the FAFSA, questions 14 and questions 15. As you can see from the instructions, if the applicant selects, yes, I am a U.S. citizen, or no, I am not a citizen or eligible non-citizen, they skip to question 16 on the FAFSA, which is about marital status. If the applicant is an eligible non-citizen, they will need to include their alien registration number, or ARN. For citizens of the freely associated states, the student would indicate on the FAFSA that he or she is an eligible non-citizen, but they're not going to include an alien registration number. If the student doesn't have an SSN, they'll enter 666, and the Department of Education will give this student like an ed-assigned pseudo-SSN for them to use. This specific pseudo-SSN is critical because this is how we track the Pell lifetime eligibility used for these students. So if a student has received one of those in a previous award year, they'll need to continue to use that same pseudo-SSN while they're applying for aid. As I alluded to, both the Social Security number and the alien registration number are like mission-critical pieces of information as it relates to database matches. And we'll cover the two database matches now, beginning with the Social Security Administration. Every single FAFSA that is submitted, or that a student submits, goes to SSA to determine a student's U.S. citizenship status, albeit they may not be a U.S. citizen. Only the FAFSAs that have an alien registration number are sent to the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. I guess at a high level, if the DHS match fails after the automated primary and secondary verification process, which we'll discuss in upcoming slides, or I'll discuss, generally a school needs to complete third step verification, which is what Maria will discuss when she comes up. So first, let's take a look at the database match with the Social Security Administration. And again, all FAFSAs are sent to SSA for matching. If there's a successful match, meaning that the Social Security number, the name, and the date of birth on the FAFSA match what is in the Social Security Administration's database, the SAR and the ICER will have a match flag, but they won't have a comment. and it'll indicate that the student's U.S. citizenship status was confirmed. I feel like I've said citizenship status like 100 times this week. If the data doesn't match SSN, name, date of birth, the ICER will have a C code. The C code will be resolved if the new ICER confirms the student's U.S. citizenship status. If the U.S. citizenship status is not confirmed, that's when you review the documentation the student submitted, or you ask for documentation, to determine if the student either needs to make a correction to that question about citizenship, or if they need to provide appropriate documentation. If it turns out that the student is not a U.S. citizen, you'd update their answer to question 14, and if they are an eligible non-citizen, they would need to include their alien registration number. So in the event that a student is in fact a U.S. citizen, but they don't pass the match, there are a number of documents that you could use that will verify a student's U.S. citizenship. This is not an exhaustive list, and even on this list, I'll just highlight some of the most common ones, the most common documents you can use to verify this. That includes a birth certificate, a certificate of citizenship, and a certificate of naturalization. Now, a slightly longer process for the DHS database match. DHS runs the student's information against their database for the automatic primary verification check. If a match is found, an ICER is returned the next day or so with DHS flag equal to Y, so yes, and secondary DH flag, no, because it hasn't yet gone through the secondary process and won't if it passes the first match. So if it's not found in that initial match, it's held for up to 3 days while it is run against DHS secondary match databases. At that point, if a match is found within 3 days, you get an ICER back. And the ICER will show for DHS flag, the primary one, no, but secondary DHS flag, a Y, for yes. But in cases where the data that's needed to complete the match is insufficient, the record won't be sent, and the transaction will reflect blank for the DHS flag and no for the secondary flag. In the event that a match is not found within 3 days, you'll still get an ICER back. This ICER will show a DHS flag of N for no, and secondary DHS flag equal to C for incontinuance. At this point is when you'd wait at least 5, but up to 15 business days to see if, or while DHS continues to search the databases for a match. If there's a match, the CPS will generate a ICER transaction number 2 with a verification number, and it'll have a secondary DHS flag of Y for yes. However, if there's not a match found, an additional ICER is not generated, and at that point you can start the third step verification. For those of you who still have the pleasure of looking at ICERs straight up instead of looking at it through your financial aid management system, you might recognize this already. For everyone else, we've highlighted the portion of the ICER that will contain this match flag data. So I guess from right to left within the blue box, next to SSA is where you would see the results of the U.S. citizenship match with the Social Security Administration. Moving over, we have the DHS match, so this would be the match for the primary verification. And then we have DHS secondary confirmation section. There's an X there now, but that can either be Y, N, or C, depending on the situation. So just to recap, for every single ICER that is submitted, those ICERs are all sent to Social Security Administration to verify U.S. citizenship. For students that include an alien registration number on their FAFSA, have 3 primary outcomes. 1, DHS confirms the student's eligibility through the automatic primary verification process. You get an ICER back the next day. That's done. Second potential outcome, the DHS confirms the student's eligibility within 3 days in the automatic secondary process. Your school gets the ICER and you're done. Third outcome, After 3 days, you get an ICER that shows that DHS is still trying to match the student in its database. You wait that 5 to 15 day period, and if you still don't have an answer, that's when you would start to submit third step verification, which Maria will discuss a little bit later. But right now, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Aaron Washington, to visit the categories of eligible non-citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to walk through the categories of eligible non-citizens and some of the documentation that these individuals may be able to provide to confirm their immigration status in the United States. Of course, the only reason that you would request this immigration documentation is if the individual failed the automated match process that Bruce discussed. So if, for many of you that are confirming eligible non-citizens, for many of you that have eligible non-citizens attending your institutions, you will never know what their immigration status is in the country if they don't fail the match or you don't have conflicting information. The documentation that you collect will be used in completing third step verification, and I'm going to walk through the categories and you'll see the documentation on the slide. These are not exhaustive lists. There may be different documentation that an individual submits, and if you are seeing different documentation, you're more than welcome to come up to the mic at the Q&A portion and let us know. But you can also see a more detailed overview of the documentation in the Volume 1, Chapter 2 of the FSA Handbook. This is going to be a very high-level overview of the categories in the documentation. These are the categories of eligible non-citizen that we're going to walk through. A lawful permanent resident is an individual who is legally permitted to live and work in the United States permanently. And generally, these individuals will have a permanent resident or alien card, and it's commonly known as a green card. A conditional resident alien is any foreign national granted permanent resident status on a conditional basis, and these individuals will subsequently have to petition the Department of Homeland Security to remove that condition. And for example, it could be the spouse of a U.S. citizen. These individuals may have similar documentation to a lawful permanent resident. We know that the conditional resident alien card may expire in 2 years as opposed to the permanent resident card expiring in 10 years. A refugee is a person outside his or her country of nationality who is unable or unwilling to return due to fear of persecution or persecution on account. It could be of many different factors. The common documentation for a refugee is an I-94. An I-94 is an arrival and departure record, and I'm going to kind of sound like a little bit like a broken record for the next few slides because many of the eligible non-citizen documentation categories will submit to you an I-94 showing their class of admission. And their class of admission, what I mean is a code that's listed on the I-94 that shows you what immigration status DHS has conferred to them. And you can see all the classes of admission in the FSA Handbook. An asylee is generally an individual who fits the definition of a refugee but is already present here in the United States or is seeking admission at a port of entry. They will also generally have an I-94. Individuals granted parole into the United States may have an I-94 that they have been paroled into the United States, and for parole, they have to be paroled for at least 1 year. So their immigration documentation has to show that they're paroled for at least 1 year. And they have to also show that they are in the United States for other than a temporary purpose with the intention of becoming a U.S. citizen. And they would demonstrate this through submitting to you an I-797 Notice of Action. A Notice of Action is simply a document that Department of Homeland Security gives to an individual that has petitioned for a status or a status has been confirmed, and it's showing that the Department of Homeland Security has taken some sort of action on that petition or application. And their I-797 would simply show that they have filed an application for lawful permanent residency. And one additional item about parolees is Generally, there's an expiration date on their immigration documentation. After that documentation expires, they're no longer eligible for a disbursement of federal student aid. So all categories of Cuban Haitian entrants are eligible for federal student aid. A Cuban Haitian entrant may have an I-94. Individuals granted conditional entrant status may also have an I-94 showing their class of admission, and the Department of Homeland Security stopped issuing this category, stopped designating individuals in this category in March 1980. So for many institutions with us today that are confirming many students through the third step match process, you may never have to confirm a conditional entrant, as they may have converted to lawful permanent resident or naturalized as U.S. citizens at this point. A victim of human trafficking is an individual compelled to provide labor or services by force, fraud, or coercion. These individuals may have an I-94 with some version of a T code on it, and you don't complete third step verification in the method that Maria will talk about momentarily. You actually call the Department of Health and Human Services, and you note the time and date of that call. And there's a lot more information about this immigration status in Dear Colleague Letter Gen 0609. So that was Dear Colleague Letter Gen 0609. Battered immigrants, qualified aliens, are immigrants of spouses of U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents who are victims of domestic violence. They can petition the Department of Homeland Security for the designation of battered immigrant qualified alien under the Violence Against Women Act. Battered immigrants, qualified aliens, may have an I-797 notice of action that is either approved or notes establishment of a prima facie case. A prima facie case usually expires. I've typically seen 180 days. That is not a rule. That's just what I've typically seen on the documentation. You may see different documentation that has been submitted to you. After the date of that expiration, an individual is no longer eligible for a disbursement of federal student, a battered immigrant qualified alien is no longer eligible for a disbursement of federal student aid. And going a little further, for individuals that are approved under the Violence Against Women Act, they may have a notice of deferred action that they submit in addition to their approved I-797, and after the expiration date of the notice of deferred action, they are also no longer eligible for a disbursement of federal student aid. But individuals in both these categories can petition the Department of Homeland Security to have those either deferred action or prima facie case extended. I'm going to stay on this category for just another slide. I've been working on citizenship issues for the longest at the department. That was my first issue that I was assigned in 2013, and I received the most questions about this immigration status. And I think it's really important to note that we have a really extensive Dear Colleague Letter, Gen 1007, out there that provides a lot of information for you when confirming eligibility for this immigration status. You do not, if the student fails the automated and primary automated match for this immigration status, you do not have to submit third step verification. So you will not have to follow the process that Maria will outline in a moment. You can, if an individual submits a I-797 notice of action and it says that their petition has been approved or they've established a prima facie case, you can award them aid. You do not have to go through third step verification for this immigration status. If you choose to go through as an institutional policy, if you can choose to complete third step verification if you have conflicting information, or it's just your policy to verify all eligible non-citizen categories every award year. So you can go through third step verification, and Marie will talk about what you will have to do when confirming this specific category. You actually have to write VAWA verification requested in the special comments box. I'm not going to talk about this slide because Bruce covered it thoroughly. So if you have any more questions, you can of course come up at the end and ask. And these are the ineligible statuses. So I want to just, I know many of you weren't here yesterday, but the question did come up yesterday about individuals who carry multiple immigration statuses, and that could be very well possible. And that's not for me to determine, or the Department of Education to determine if an individual can carry multiple immigration statuses in the United States. For example, if an individual is a deferred action for childhood arrival recipient, they could very well also have a status under VAWA as a better immigrant qualified alien. I don't know. I don't work for the Department of Homeland Security, and I don't confer statuses onto individuals. If they do have multiple statuses, one in an eligible category and one in an ineligible category, Maria correctly pointed out yesterday that the eligible status would trump the ineligible status. And I'm going to now turn it back over to Bruce to talk about gaining eligibility.
Thanks, Aaron. Has anybody ever been in a situation where a student started but didn't give you the documentation that you needed until much later? No? Okay. Well, in the event that that happens, there are some provisions in our regs that may still allow the student to get awarded. A student is eligible for federal Pell Grant, Teach Grant, and campus-based aid retroactive to the beginning of the award year in which they become eligible. And a student is eligible for direct loans retroactive to the beginning of the loan period during which the student gained eligibility. So, as an example, if you are, let's say you have a fall and a spring semester, and I came to your school in the fall, but I didn't get you my eligible non-citizenship documentation until April of the next year. Yeah. If the award year started, well, the award year started July 1st, I would be able, or you'd be able to award me Pell, Teach Grant, and campus-based aid for that entire award year. If my loan period also started in the fall, you would be able to award me for the fall through the end of my loan period. As it relates to documentation in subsequent award years, you must document a student's immigration status in a subsequent award year if that student is not confirmed through the automatic primary or secondary match process. Additionally, like if I came to your school this year and presented a temporary I-551, or I was in any of those categories, you would need documentation in a subsequent award year, assuming I did not pass the primary or secondary match process that I talked about earlier. However, documentation is not required in subsequent award years if the student is a U.S. citizen or national citizen of the freely associated states, or if the saved response from that previous award year showed that the student was an eligible non-citizen and the documents used for that third step verification haven't expired, as long as that student passed the automated primary and secondary match process. And like Aaron alluded to earlier, in most cases, hopefully your students would pass the SSA match, and then that's where your process would stop. They pass the primary and secondary verification match process, and then your process is over. But if it doesn't, that's where Maria's process picks up, and I'll invite her up to the podium now to discuss third step verification and save. You want me to click? Yeah, all right. You can bring this down if it helps.
Okay. Can I put it like underneath there? How far can I bring it down like that? Okay, thanks. Okay, we've been sitting down for the previous presentation, so I just have to get used to the podium here. I'd like to tell you about third step verification, and here we go. So, third step verification. The paper secondary confirmation step, which required you to submit a paper G845, is now called third step verification. If the student doesn't pass, this should say either the primary or secondary confirmations, or if you have conflicting information about the student's immigration status after receiving a match result, you must complete third step verification. So rather than complete the G845 form, you now must submit the third step verification request and receive the responses electronically through the SAVE system. When you receive an ICER with a C code and comment code 046, 105, or 109, request the student's most current unexpired immigration document and make a copy of it. Then carefully review the student's immigration documents against the status and document descriptions in Volume 1, Chapter 2, U.S. Citizens and Eligible Non-Citizens chapter of the FSA Handbook to see if it supports an eligible status. If it does, or you're unsure, start third step verification by downloading the immigration document to your computer so it'll be ready and available when you go to download it to or upload it to SAVE. If it does not look like an eligible status, tell the student they aren't eligible unless they provide documentation that supports an actual eligible status. Okay, how many of you have actually gone in and activated your user ID, your SAVE user ID? Good, good. How many of you have actually sent in a request and gotten a response back? Wonderful, good, good. Okay, so let me walk you through the SAVE system screens, and please note that I'm skipping the instructions on activating your PDPA supervisor user ID, and I'm skipping how to create a subordinate third step only user for yourself and others in your office. Remember that a PDPA must create a subordinate third step only user ID to submit third step verification requests. You'll find user ID setup information at the beginning of the SAVE instructions for ED school users document on the IFAP DHS SAVE eligible non-citizen information page. To submit a record for third step verification, access the SAVE system at that URL. SAVE also recommends using the Chrome rather than some of the other browsers for better results. The DHS SAVE instructions for school document is at that URL. But let me tell you, I was just able to update those instructions, and the new instructions that will be posted early next week will follow the flow of the presentation that I'm doing now, so I think it's easier to follow. But if you have a burning reason to have to do a SAVE request before you get the new instructions, use the old ones. They're good enough to get you started. So watch for the new electronic announcement early next week, as I said. Okay, so SAVE system user agreement is the first screen you'll see. Check the I agree box and click Next. On the SAVE login screen, enter the subordinate third step only user ID and password that you either set up for yourself or receive from your supervisor, PDPA, and then click Submit. On the search case screen, click Search Case on the Welcome screen. You don't have a lot of options there, so click the Search Case. On the Search Case screen, enter the student's DHS verification number and date of birth from the ICER, then click Submit. We'll talk about the No Records Found error message a little bit later. On this screen, click the verification number field. It's a hyperlink. When you hover over it, you'll see it's a hyperlink. There are 5 SAVE responses that you can receive after you enter the student's DHS verification number and date of birth. I want you to focus on the SAVE response box and the blue case status message bar to determine the action to take on each one. Each one is pretty specific. I've numbered the responses for clarity for this presentation and in the new SAVE instruction document, but they're not numbered anyplace in SAVE. This is for your purposes. When I started looking through, thinking as a financial aid officer, I hope, and putting together the instructions, I was trying to figure out what the best way to do it was, and this following sequence is what I found I think is the best. Okay, SAVE response number 1. SAVE the response is resubmit document, case status, case closed. You scroll up to the top of the screen to see the blue case status ribbon. For some reason, when this page lands on your computer, it doesn't go to the very top, so you have to scroll up a little bit to see that blue ribbon. If it says case closed, then you need to request a new DHS verification number. I'll explain how to do that at the end of the presentation. Also, I want you to notice where the Save Response box is located. So for this first resubmit doc, case status, case closed, there's not much else you can do except, there is nothing else you can do except request a new DHS verification number to resubmit the document. Okay, response number 2 is resubmit doc, case status, case returned. Yay, this is a good screen to get because now you can submit the document from this screen. You'll see this response to submit a third-step verification request. You'll note the special comments box where you can enter special review requests such as J-Treaty or VAWA or anything else that you think is relevant to the case, or if you're unsure of the documentation. Remember, Aaron told you that you're not required to verify VAWA students if the documentation you receive matches the documentation described in the FSA handbook. That FSA handbook is so handy. Let's see, also enter requests for Cuban Haitian entrance review in this box until December 16th. After that date, you'll see a Cuban Haitian entrance button that I'll show you on the next screen. We're doing a code deployment, and then after the code deployment is when you'll see a couple of new things. Let's see, if the name or the alien registration on the student's immigration document doesn't match the data in SAVE, enter a detailed note such as date of birth is incorrect in SAVE, see birth certificate for correct date, and then upload a copy of the birth certificate with the immigration document as evidence. As a best practice, FSA recommends entering the response you anticipate for each request, even requesting LPR status review, just to make it really obvious what you want. Okay, this is the bottom half of the same screen. Notice the Cuban Haitian entrance button that I promised you will appear a little bit later in December. And this is where you use the upload buttons to attach the student's immigration document that you downloaded to your computer earlier. You submit the request by clicking on the Institute Additional Verification button. I don't know why they didn't just call it submit, but they're calling, this is more to their procedures, that they called it the Institute Additional Verification button. You'll notice that this button changes from white to dark green after you upload the student's document. It's real cool. You got to watch for that. Don't click on the closed case buttons. They'll close the case and you'll have to request a new DHS verification number to resubmit it. So watch out there. Okay, so save response number 3 is when you receive, on applicant status, you receive application pending, parolee expires, parolee indefinite, non-immigrant, or other. This response is unique because this is SAVE's resolution to the no cases found error message that you received on every record entered when SAVE was initially launched. These ineligible statuses were blocking your access. SAVE fixed the problem for these statuses by building in a link to the third-step verification screen on this page. You have to scroll down to the middle bottom half of the screen and click on the Still Not Sure Institute Additional Verification link to go to the second page. So you want to look for that special link to submit the documentation. I apologize for not adding a full screenshot on this slide because it would be easier to see that page 2 has the upload file buttons and the Institute Additional Verification button. So you can submit the third step verification request just like the resubmit doc screen you saw on the bottom half of response number 2. So you can submit a third step verification on response 2 or response 3. Those are the only two that are used for actually submitting the response. We come to response number 4 is case under review. After you submit a case using response 2 or 3, a case under review screen will appear for 3 to 5 business days or until the case is updated with an applicant status. Response number 5. I'm calling this response applicant status, or applicant is a status, final response no link. This can be any status, including those in response number 3, parolee, expires, parolee, indefinite, and other, etc. This is the result of your verification request, or one that another school has actually requested. Don't be fooled by that green thumbs up. It doesn't indicate an eligible status. It only means that SAVE found a match in their database. When you get this screen, the first time you access a student's record, the big question really is, can you use this to process the student's Title IV aid? To figure that out, you need to do a little more analysis. The analysis consists of comparing the student's immigration document with the SAVE response. If they match and support an eligible status, use this SAVE response to continue processing the student's Title IV aid. If they match but they do not support an eligible status, tell the students, sorry, you're not eligible until you provide a document that supports an eligible status. When the student files their FAFSA before the status is updated in SAVE, the document may support an eligible status, such as LPR. They hand you an LPR resident card, and you go into SAVE, and the SAVE response shows an ineligible status, such as application pending, I-485, or a different eligible status, such as parolee expires. It's all about timing, when they filed the FAFSA, when they're handing you the actual document. If they don't match, request a new DHS verification number to submit the verification request. My note here, case status can be returned or closed means that you should compare and take the action provided on this screen whether the case is returned or closed on this response. So these are the 5 responses you get when you first access a student's record to look at SAVE for the first time. Now let's talk about other functions that you need to know about in SAVE. The title of this slide should be Checking the SAVE System for a Response After Submitting a Third-Step Verification Request. So after 3 to 5 business days after submitting the request and receiving the case under review response, log back into SAVE using the same URL and following the same steps we used earlier to access SAVE. The SAVE response will always be number 5 under this scenario. If you haven't received a SAVE response after 15 days, you must determine the student's eligibility based on the immigration document provided. After December 16th, SAVE will email you a notification when a response to your verification request has been posted to SAVE. You won't have to go looking for it. If you receive an ineligible SAVE response for a student for whom you've just used the 15-day rule, the student, rather than your school, is liable for any overpayment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about that pesky no cases found error message. It still appears every once in a while, but for completely different reasons than when we first implemented SAVE. Now you can resolve the issue with the following procedure. Re-enter the DHS verification number with capitalized alpha characters and date of birth with leading zeros. This means 01 instead of 1 for January. If that doesn't work, make sure that you're using your third step only user ID and not your PDPA user ID. If that doesn't work, check if the FAFSA date of birth matches the immigration document date of birth. If not, re-enter the record using the date of birth from the immigration document and then have the student fix the FAFSA later because they just put it in the FAFSA incorrectly. You should probably also ask the student for evidence that the date of birth is correct on the immigration document, because you never know when something could be incorrect. If that doesn't work, log into FAA Access, check the DHS flags on the most recent ICER transaction. If non-citizen status is confirmed, use this transaction to process the student's aid. Now, when it's a student's is confirmed, you get the no records found message rather than a legitimate LPR status or something. If it could not be confirmed, if could not confirm non-citizen eligibility or incontinuance shows on the ICER, there's something wrong that you can't see. Send an email to Application Processing Division at ed.gov with no records found in the subject line. We'll research and respond as soon as possible. The most likely thing is that for some reason SAVE has a completely different date of birth than what you have either in your documentation or on your FAFSA. I can't explain that one, but again, if you make a correction, in the corrections, in the special comments box, you want to write a note that your documentation shows a different date of birth than what's on the SAVE system, and maybe you want to say please advise or something to that effect, so that if they do note that the date of birth is incorrect, you could have conflicting documentation. It could be from some other source. Okay, requesting a new DHS verification number. This is another procedure that has changed several times since we implemented SAVE. Submit a request only if you receive SAVE response number 1 or response number 5 and the immigration document doesn't match the SAVE response. Before you request a DHS verification number, carefully check the student's document. Sometimes students enter an alien registration number on the FAFSA because they have one, but they actually hand you a certificate of naturalization or a certificate of citizenship or evidence showing that they are a citizen of the freely associated states. You know, you don't have to do third-step verification on these students. You can just make a copy, put it in the student's file, and process them as if you would any other U.S. citizen. And then, if you can have them, advise the student to go to their Social Security office and update their citizenship status there, so that then they'll just cruise right through and get a positive response on the Social Security match and not get hung up with DHS. They also want to stop putting an alien registration number on the FAFSA if they are a U.S. citizen. Let's see, this is the procedure. First, you must make a correction to in FAA access by blanking out and re-entering the student's name, date of birth, or alien registration number. We ask you to do this because approximately 50% of the time, the record goes to DHS and the result is a new ICER with a new DHS verification number, or eligible non-citizen status is confirmed. That if you do it, that saves us work and you work and waiting for another DHS verification number. So anytime after 3 to 5 business days, you download the latest ICER after you have made this correction and compare the last 2 transactions. The following analysis is extremely important to do every time you receive a new ICER as a result of either your correction or one made by APD resending the record to matches, which I'll explain in a minute. In the match flags section of the latest ICER, check the DHS match flag fields. If the citizenship is confirmed, yay, use that ICER to process the student's aid. If the confirmation is in continuance, you need to wait 10 business days for a CPS-generated ICER before progressing to the next bullet. If DHS could not confirm eligible non-citizen status, check if the DHS verification number has changed from the previous transaction. That's why I want you to check it with compare, the 2 last ICERs. If yes, enter the new DHS verification number and the student's date of birth into SAVE to submit the 3rd-step verification request. If no, send the email to Application Processing Division at ed.gov with the DHS verification number in the subject line. APD will resend the record to DHS SAVE to generate a new ICER. This works 100% of the time, and after 3 to 5 business days, follow the instructions beginning with number 2, where you go out and look for the new ICER on your system. Okay, that's everything I want to tell you about the SAVE system and the things that you need to know. Again, take a look at the instructions to make sure that you're following everything that you need to know. This is an overview, so there's more detail in the instructions about special things that you may find. So let me just tell you about some future enhancements. The DHS SAVE Instructions for School document will be updated next week, as I said before, and this will include the new response screens I covered in this presentation, more or less in the same order, and all the setup instructions that I didn't cover in the presentation. December 16th, SAVE will send an automated email response to the user when response is available in SAVE. And the third future enhancement is that in February 2019, we're going to give you the Resend to Matches button, so you can bypass making the correction and looking for the ICER, and then if you don't get confirmation or a new DHS verification number, you have to send it to us. You're no longer going to have to go through that whole procedure. You can just go ahead and hit the resubmit to matches button and send it directly to DHS with 100% response of getting student confirmed or a new DHS verification number. Nobody's happy about that? It's like, okay. Alrighty, so let's talk about SAVE resources. You'll find more information on the IFAP, U.S. citizen and eligible non-citizen information page, including the Federal Student Aid Handbook, Volume 1, Chapter 2, U.S. citizenship and eligible non-citizens. I can't tell you enough how much I rely on that information to determine whether the student is eligible or not. And it also has the DHS SAVE instructions for school users. These are our contact names and email addresses and phone numbers. But to tell you the truth, we'd really like you to just send your questions to Application Processing Division at ed.gov. I review, when I get them in my email box, I just send them on to Application Processing Division at ed.gov because I have another colleague who goes through that email box every single day. You'll get a quicker response if you just go directly to Application Processing Division at ed.gov, because when he doesn't know the answer to a question, he comes around to my cubicle and asks me about it. Also, the contact for SAVE is Tommy Benbow, and he can be reached at that email address and phone number if you want to call him. So that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? I'd like to come up to the podium, to the microphone and ask questions. You're welcome to do that. Please tell me who, your name and your school, and go ahead.
Michael Corso, William Patterson University. Just a comment. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm with all the technology we have and all the automation we have, I still find it very odd that when someone who is a resident alien becomes a U.S. citizen, that it's their responsibility to go to Social Security and say, "Hi, I'm a U.S. citizen." And when I inform the student to do that, they go to the Social Security Administration and are told, "We have no idea what you're talking about."
Okay, that's
so I find that very frustrating for myself and for the student.
That's the first time I've heard that. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. Eventually, SSA catches up, but it's always what I want. The reason what happens is, again, like I said, it's timing. If the student just became a U.S. citizen 2 weeks ago, chances are SSA hasn't caught up yet. If it's been 2 years, I'm as surprised as you are. But this is the best advice that I can give you, is to continue sending students with their documentation to SSA to update their citizenship status, because that's all that I know to tell you. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Melanie Johnson. I'm a consultant, so I'm not at the school on a regular basis, but I have some situations where I've seen citizenship issues for students where it never gets cleared up, but the student has received aid for several years. Have you all run into any of those types of cases?
Are you talking about a C code on an ICER?
Yes.
Okay, so you want to go check on the SAVE system. Sometimes it gets updated on this, check and see what the response is on SAVE. Now that it's gotten more automated, I want to say, you have to really have to check both places. Check the ICER and also check SAVE. Submit it through the SAVE system to get the answer. If you can't see it, it doesn't always update on the ICER as fast as it does on SAVE. And that's the whole reason that with a continuation, if it's more than 15 days, oh, I'm sorry, I should be saying that's not the right answer. Well, you should really submit it through SAVE, and if you don't get a response back in 15 days, then you can make your own judgment using the documentation. But don't rely only on the ICER for your final decision.
So I have a student that has received aid since 2011, and the citizenship status has not been confirmed at all.
They should not be receiving aid. Oh, just a second.
Maybe we can bring it back, I guess we can bring that back. If you send either
Send an email
Maria
to me.
or me or Bruce, we can all discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Okay, we'll be here if there's any other questions that you want to ask us before you leave. Safe travels, everyone.